Welcome to the History in Focus channel. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this one.
There were so many bodies after the bombing of Dresden that burial became impossible. In February 1945, the army piled the dead in the central square and burned them by the thousands, right in the middle of the city. It was the only solution left. Sachsenhausen was less than an hour from Berlin, almost in the capital's backyard. It was there that the SS tested and refined methods it later spread to other camps. The people in the photo had already become numbers, not names. This is the photo that became the symbol of destroyed Dresden. In September 1945, a photographer climbed the City Hall tower and framed an allegorical statue that seems to look down at the city and ruins below. In 3 days of bombing, one of Germany's most beautiful cities had vanished. The woman standing on the right watches her own end approaching. The scene is from the war between Japan and China, years before the world paid attention. Japanese soldiers trained with bayonets on living prisoners, with an audience watching. The Marines took dogs into the Pacific jungle because they could smell hidden Japanese snipers before any human could see them. This one took the bullet in his owner's place. In Guam, there's a cemetery just for the dogs that never came back. They had left Buchenwald, and the next stop was Palestine. Children who had lived through the unthinkable were now traveling to a place that promised a new beginning. Most of them had no family waiting anymore. 7 Americans shot in the head, executed by an SS man. In January 1945, their comrades arrived, identified each one, and buried them right there. War left no time for mourning. Dieppe, August 1942. The Canadians landed on a French beach that became a trap. Within hours, the sand was covered with bodies. The rehearsal was costly, but it taught what not to repeat on D-Day. The Soviets captured near Kiev in 1941 entered a statistic few talk about. Most Russian prisoners held by the Germans died of hunger and cold in captivity. In the foreground, a burned-out truck marks the road. American soldiers opened a storage room in Buchenwald in May 1945 and found wedding rings, piles of them in a single vault. Each ring there had been taken from a person before that person became ash in the camp. That was what the SS kept. The man in the photo weighed less than a child. Camp Gusen in Austria was a satellite of Mauthausen and worked under one simple rule: labor until death. Hunger was not an accident, it was a method. A crow perched on a dead German soldier. No unit, no exact date, no name. Only what war leaves behind when armies move on and forget to take their own dead. When the Americans liberated Buchenwald, they found men reduced to skeletons who were still breathing. Many did not believe it was a rescue. They had heard too many promises that ended in gas chambers. Nuremberg hosted the great Nazi rallies of the 1930s, a stage for flags and crowds in a trance. In June 1945, that same city was in ruins. Later, it would lend its name to the tribunal that judged it all. France, 1944. Doctors working in the open field with no hospital, no time, and the noise of the front nearby. Wartime medicine learned more in those years than in decades of peace. 3 Americans look at a row of German bodies in Echternach, Luxembourg. The city changed hands more than once during the Ardennes offensive. The people who lived there saw both sides pass through and come back. On Iwo Jima, there were more cameras than people imagine. Marine cameramen filmed the battle under real fire, and that work produced one of the most famous photographs in history. Several of them did not leave the island alive. Liverpool was a port, and ports became targets. The Luftwaffe bombed the city night after night to cut the convoys that kept England supplied. What people saw in the morning were entire blocks without roofs. Russian soldiers, newly freed, being disinfected by Canadians in Germany, April 1945. Those who came out of German captivity came out with lice, typhus, and hunger. The bath was the first step back toward being treated as human. September 1939, the first weeks of the war. The Wehrmacht was shooting Polish prisoners before the world even understood what was beginning. Extermination did not wait for the camps to begin. A German soldier crying in a trench. No heroic caption, no propaganda. On the other side of the war camera, there were also people breaking down, and the surviving photo shows exactly that. Surrender, for the ordinary soldier on both sides, was the chance to get out alive. The American in the photo escorts captured Germans. Many preferred to fall into Western hands rather than try their luck with the Soviets. News of Hitler's death reached the United States on May 1st, 1945, and stopped New Yorkers in the middle of the street to read the headlines. The man who had set the world on fire died hidden in a bunker. Bochnia, southern Poland, December 1939. A mass execution of civilians in retaliation during the first months of occupation. No one carefully recorded the exact number killed there. It was only the beginning. Hiroshima, seen from above afterward. One single bomb on an August morning in 1945 erased the city in an instant. It was not ordinary bombing rubble scattered across the ground. It was what remains when the atom becomes a weapon. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel signed the German surrender in Berlin on May 7, 1945. Years later, he would sit in the dock at Nuremberg and be hanged. The pen from that day bought him no forgiveness. Little Boy did not look like much. A metal tube a little over 3 meters long that fit inside an aircraft bay. Inside, it was enough energy to kill tens of thousands of people in seconds over Hiroshima. An American mortar crew near the Rhine, 1945. Crossing Germany's last great river was what separated the Allies from the heart of the Reich. Every meter of riverbank cost ammunition and lives. American soldiers stand in the broken window of the Berghof, Hitler's refuge in the Alps. There he received heads of state and planned the war. In 1945, it became a backdrop for GIs posing with a mountain view. Besieged Leningrad, 1942. Residents pushed a tram away from a facade that bombing had brought down. The city endured almost 900 days of siege, and hunger killed more than the bombs. A dead German soldier left on a street in Belgium. When the front moved quickly, bodies stayed where they fell, sometimes for days. The photo has no heroism, only the raw price paid by those who lost. Omaha Beach, after the worst had passed. The men in the photo are not in combat. They are so exhausted they are sleeping sitting on the sand where so many had died hours earlier. D-Day did not end when the beach was taken. Iwo Jima, 1945. Navy vehicles destroyed and scattered across a beach of black volcanic sand. The Japanese let the Americans land and then opened fire from above. The trap had been set. An American medic bandaging a wounded German soldier, 1943. In the middle of the most brutal war in history, the rule of treating a captured enemy still mattered to some. The photo shows one of those rare moments. Detroit, 1943. 3 fathers saying goodbye to their children at the station before leaving for training. After Pearl Harbor, even men with families were called up. The farewell on the platform became a repeated scene across the country. The war shown in films is the war of combat. The real one, most of the time, was this: men buried in a trench waiting with mud, cold, and the boredom before the shot. Allied trenches were like this. Rotterdam seen from above after the German bombing of May 1940. The Luftwaffe flattened the city center to force the Dutch surrender, and it worked within days. It was a message sent at the very beginning of the war. Soviet machine gunners attacking across the open steppe near Stalingrad 1942. There was nowhere to hide. The plain became one of the bloodiest battlefields the world had ever seen. Shortly before the second wave of paratroopers jumped over Normandy on the night of June 6, 1944, the men covered the glider with graffiti. Humor from men who might not return. Many did not. German troops marching through Warsaw in September 1939. It was the opening of the war, and Poland fell in weeks. The victory parade hid what would come next for the city: 6 years of horror. Warsaw Uprising, 1944. The Prudential Building, the tallest skyscraper in the city, was hit directly by a giant German mortar. The photo freezes the instant of impact. The Polish resistance was fighting alone. Warsaw in 1944, during the uprising. Polish fighters battled street by street against a much larger army, waiting for Soviet help that stayed still on the other side of the river and watched. The city paid the price. A Japanese photo taken aboard an aircraft carrier before the attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941. The planes lined up had not yet taken off. In a few hours they would change the course of the war and of the United States. American ambulance jeeps carrying wounded men during the fighting in Belgium, early 1945. The Willys became a key piece, small, fast, and able to pull men out of the line of fire on roads no truck could face. The crew of a Sherman tank resting beside the vehicle in Normandy, June 10, 1944. They wrote letters home between one battle and the next. For a soldier, the mail was the only thread connecting him to normal life. A German Heinkel bomber over Warsaw in 1939. Poland was the first place where Germany truly tested blitzkrieg, with aircraft destroying cities before the infantry arrived. Allied soldiers collapsed from exhaustion after landing in Normandy. The image of a soldier is always the attack, but the human body has limits. After the adrenaline came this, the blackout of men who had not slept for days. Hitler receiving the Reichstag's ovation after annexing Austria in 1938. It was taken without a shot, with Austrian crowds applauding in the streets. The world let it pass, and he learned he could go further. Dutch soldiers surrendering in 1940. The Netherlands resisted for only a few days before the bombing of Rotterdam broke any will to continue. A neutral country swallowed in less than a week. A British prisoner being escorted by German Luftwaffe pilots. Among aviators, sometimes a strange respect remained. A man who fell from the sky was treated like a colleague in the profession before becoming a prisoner. Taking the flooded island of Walcheren in the Netherlands cost weeks of fighting in icy water, November 1944. The German prisoner in the photo is what was left of it. Exhausted men on both sides once the shooting stopped. A Japanese officer surrendering his sword in 1945. For a Japanese soldier, giving up the sword meant giving up honor, something worse than death in the minds of many. The ceremony marked the end of an empire that believed itself invincible. General MacArthur landing in the Philippines in 1944. He had sworn to return after being forced to flee in 1942 and made sure to be photographed stepping down into the water. The promise became perfect propaganda. The man in the photo killed 367 enemies and did not even use a scope on his rifle. A Siberian hunter of the Evenki people, he went to war after the age of 40 and marked each kill by carving his pipe. The Germans called him the shaman of the taiga. The Reichstag at the end of the war, riddled with bullets and smoke. Taking that building in Berlin became the symbol of the Reich's fall for the Soviets. The photo of the red flag on top went around the world. Eisenhower speaking with paratroopers on the eve of D-Day. The photo became famous, but few know he already had a letter in his pocket taking all the blame if the invasion failed. He was prepared for the worst. Motorcyclists of the Leibstandarte SS Division in the Netherlands, 1940. It was Hitler's personal guard unit turned into a combat force. The speed of blitzkrieg depended on scouts like these going ahead. Hitler surrounded by generals at an airfield in Poland in 1939. Around him were Rommel, Keitel, and other names the world would learn to fear or judge. The beginning of the war gathered into a single photo. Parisians welcoming Allied troops on August 25, 1944. After 4 years of German occupation, the city exploded with joy in the streets. Women climbed onto tanks to hug soldiers they did not even know. The Big Three at Yalta, early 1945. Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin sat together deciding what the world would look like after the war. The lines they drew at that meeting divided Europe for the next 40 years. An officer teaching boys from the Hitler Youth how to use a machine gun. At the end of the war, Germany was sending 14 and 15-year-old children to the front. Human ammunition to plug the gaps. Barrage balloons floating over an avenue in besieged Leningrad. Those balloons held cables in the air to disrupt low-flying bombers. The city invented anything it could to survive the siege. A Soviet soldier from a reconnaissance unit feeding his pet near Moscow. In the middle of the deadliest war in history, there was still a small corner for tenderness. Small, but real. Red Army soldiers who captured a German command vehicle full of documents, 1942. A car like that, with maps and orders inside, was worth more than a tank. Information won battles. The crew of a Soviet armored vehicle posing with the unit's dog, 1943. The shepherd was named Julbars and went to the front with them. Soviet dogs sniffed out mines and saved thousands of lives in that war. A decoration ceremony for German paratroopers after the capture of Fort Eben Emael in Belgium, 1940. A handful of men landed by glider on top of the fortress and forced it to surrender within hours. It changed how the world saw airborne troops. A British flag hanging among the ruins of Coventry after the bombing of November 1940. The Luftwaffe flattened the city center in a single night. The flag in the middle of the wreckage was pure defiance. American transport planes crossing Belgium toward the Netherlands, September 1944. It was Operation Market Garden, the bold gamble to shorten the war from the north. It failed and cost dearly at Arnhem. Gunners from a Navy cruiser scanning the sky during the landing at Mindoro, Philippines, December 1944. The fear there had a name, kamikaze. The Japanese threw entire aircraft against the ships. American troops climbing down into landing craft in Bougainville Bay. The most vulnerable moment of any invasion was this: men packed into a boat, an easy target, before stepping onto the beach. Allied troops advancing through hostile ground in France, 1944. After the beach came the worst part, the hedgerows of Normandy, where every field became an ambush. The Germans knew the terrain, the Allies did not. The Battle of Britain was fought in the air in 1940. For the first time, a war would be decided by aircraft alone. The British pilots were few, and Churchill said that never had so many owed so much to so few. Bombs from a German aircraft ruined 12 houses in Amsterdam. Occupied Holland also suffered bombing, sometimes from its own side by mistake. For the people living there, where the bomb came from mattered little. British soldiers of the expeditionary force preparing to embark for France at the beginning of the war. They went with confidence. Months later, they would be trapped at Dunkirk, waiting for boats to flee back to the island. German Luftwaffe pilots giving interviews to journalists after a mission. The Nazi propaganda machine turned airmen into stars. Every victory in the sky became a headline before the dust had settled. British Crusader tanks advancing. They were fast, but poorly armored, and in the African desert they caught fire easily against German guns. Speed did not make up for the lack of protection. Nurses from a field hospital that traveled through England and Egypt for 3 years before reaching France. War was also this. People spending years away from home caring for other people's wounded. Aerial photo of an attack on an oil depot in France. Cutting off German fuel was as important as destroying tanks, because a tank without gasoline is scrap metal. War was also won in oil tanks. American Marines on Peleliu, an island generals promised to take in days, but that took more than 2 months. The fighting was so brutal and so little remembered that it became a symbol of a wasted battle. The numbers were terrible. Roosevelt signing the declaration of war against Japan on December 8, 1941, one day after Pearl Harbor. He called that day a day that would live in infamy, and the United States entered the war for good. Marines of the 5th Division displaying captured Japanese flags. For the American soldier in the Pacific, the enemy flag became a war trophy, taken home as proof that he had survived that hell. Landing at Cape Gloucester, New Britain, December 24, 1943. Christmas Eve in a soaked tropical jungle, where rain and malaria killed almost as much as the Japanese. There was no festive mood. A German Junkers trimotor after landing on a frozen lake in Norway, 1940. The invasion of Norway depended on these aircraft to carry troops where there were no runways. Landing on ice was a gamble on every flight. A Luftwaffe War Correspondence Company in Belgium, 1940. The Germans sent cameras along with the troops to film victory in real time. Many famous images of the Blitzkrieg came from these teams. American howitzers pouring fire onto German positions. Artillery was the greatest killer of the war, more than tanks or aircraft. Before the infantry advanced, it softened the ground and the earth shook. Marines of the 5th Division climbing the slope of Mount Suribachi on Iwo Jima, with battle smoke clinging to them. It was on top of that hill that the most famous flag raising of the war took place. Men of the 8th Regiment trying to advance and pinned down by German fire inside a Belgian town. Urban combat was the worst. Every window could hide a machine gun, and the enemy saw you before you saw him. Tanks of a Panzer Division in France, 1940. This was where Blitzkrieg proved itself. Concentrate the tanks, punch through the line, and do not stop. In 6 weeks, France, considered unbeatable, was on its knees. A German patrol in the Egyptian desert as the Ghibli, the sand wind, blew near El Alamein, 1942. In the desert, the invisible enemy was the climate. Sand got into everything: eyes, food, engines, weapons. German pilots from the squadron that attacked Scapa Flow, the British naval base. Striking the English fleet at home right at the start of the war was a morale blow. The photo shows those who returned, and not everyone did. American men and equipment crossing the bridge at Remagen with 2 destroyed jeeps in front. The Allies found that bridge over the Rhine intact by luck, and the crossing hastened the end of the war in Germany. Japanese soldiers counterattacking the Marines in the jungle of Cape Gloucester. They would fall back first, then regroup and return with everything they had. Surrender was not in their manual, and that made every island a nightmare. Secretaries, housewives, and waitresses from Florida entering technical school to learn war work. With the men at the front, women kept the factories running. Without them, there was no ammunition. Allied soldiers packed into a landing craft, 1944. Those minutes crossing to the beach were the longest of each man's life. Knowing the ramp would open right in front of enemy fire and going anyway. U.S. Army soldiers landing on a beach at Butaritari in the Pacific. Each one of those small islands had a name no one back home knew how to pronounce, and still men died to take the sand. Soviet T-34 tanks in a forest near Berlin, 1945. The T-34 was probably the best tank of the war. Simple, tough, and built by the thousands. It was the one that rolled into the heart of the Reich. American bombers launched from an aircraft carrier attacking Japan. By the end of the war, attacks were reaching Japanese territory with almost no resistance. The empire that began at Pearl Harbor saw the sky turn against it. What remained of a German Panzer IV after the battle? An empty, burned-out shell abandoned in the field. Each one meant a crew that either escaped in time or did not. Troops of the SS Leibstandarte crossing the Meuse River in the Netherlands, May 13, 1940. Crossing that river broke the Allied defense and opened the way to France. A few days decided the whole campaign. A German submarine tied up with the swastika visible on its side. The U-boats nearly won the war by themselves, sinking the convoys that kept England alive. The Battle of the Atlantic was the longest of all. In those small, fast boats, the gunner aimed the .50 caliber machine gun at much larger ships and then fled. The scene is near New Guinea. Courage or madness depended on which day you asked. China had been fighting Japan since before the war began for the rest of the world. In the photo, a Chinese soldier guards a row of American P-40 fighters. With shark mouths painted on their noses, those planes became legend. A French woman serving a sip of cider to a British soldier in Lisieux, 1944. Small gestures like this, during the Allied advance through France, were the population's way of saying thank you to those arriving as liberators. Near Lake Balaton, Hungary, a column of captured Germans passes beside the wreck of a Soviet tank. The last major German offensive of the war happened there, and it failed. The end had already been written. A Marine using a giant unexploded naval shell as a backrest for a nap, July 4th, 1944. 3 days of combat without sleep can make a man rest his head on a bomb and relax. The U.S. Third Army in Koblenz, Germany, March 1945. The city stood where two great rivers meet, a point the Allies needed to cross. The Reich retreated from river to river until none were left. The war was not fought only by men. Millions of women were pushed into the conflict, in factories, hospitals, resistance movements, and, in many cases, against their own will. That part rarely becomes a film. Traces of anti-aircraft fire crossing the sky over Moscow during a German attack, July 1941. The thin trails in the photo are projectiles climbing after the bombers. The Soviet capital was under attack and would not fall. This young man killed more than 230 enemies at Stalingrad and died at 19 in 1943. A hunter of the Nanai people from Russia's Far East, he aimed so well that the Germans put a price on his head. He became an official hero only 67 years later. Transport planes dropping supplies to the troops surrounded in Bastogne, January 6, 1945. The Americans were isolated and freezing during the Ardennes siege. Those parachutes falling from the sky were the difference between holding out and dying. These men are former British prisoners boarding a Lancaster bomber in Lubeck, May 1945. Once the war ended, the RAF used the same aircraft that had bombed Germany to bring liberated prisoners back home. British motorcycle messengers in an 80-kilometer test in Cyprus, 1942, wearing gas masks. The sign marked where to put the mask on. They trained to deliver orders even under gas attack, a constant fear in the war. Cologne Cathedral, standing in the middle of a city reduced to dust, April 1945. The Gothic towers survived more than 200 air raids that erased everything around them. Coincidence, luck, or a reference point for pilots. Soviet cavalry attacking the German rear, 1942. In the middle of tanks and aircraft, the Red Army still sent men on horseback. It worked in snow and mud where engines got stuck, the old and the new in the same war. Soviet cavalrymen in a saber charge, 1941. It may look like a scene from another century, but mounted charges still happened. Against unprepared infantry on the open steppe, shock and fear still counted. 2 Soviet marksmen in white clothing walking through the snow near Leningrad, December 1942. In the Russian winter, camouflage meant survival. Whoever blended into the snow shot first and made it home. Dutch military motorcyclists in a parade before the invasion. In May 1940, all that parade ground order did not hold for 5 days against Blitzkrieg. The Netherlands bet on neutrality, and neutrality did not save it. A Soviet aviation engineer with colleagues beside a Yak fighter at an airfield, 1942. The people who kept the aircraft flying rarely appear in heroic photos. Without a mechanic, the pilot did not take off. Soviet soldiers boarding for the front. The Red Army sent men into combat by the millions in a flow that seemed endless. That mass, more than any weapon, broke Germany in the east. Aerial photo of the fires after the Luftwaffe bombed Minsk, June 1941. It was the beginning of the invasion of the Soviet Union, and entire cities burned in the first days. The east became the slaughterhouse of the war. General Rommel with the 15th Panzer in the desert between Tobruk and Sidi Omar. The British respected him so much that they nicknamed him the Desert Fox. He was the kind of enemy even the other side's propaganda admired. German tanks in Poland, 1939. It was there that the world first saw what modern war was. Tanks, aircraft, and radio acting together, too fast for any old defense to react. Poland was the test subject. A flamethrower from the 37th Division in action on Bougainville, 1944. In the Pacific, the Japanese dug into concrete bunkers that bullets could not pierce. The solution was fire thrown inside. It was as brutal as it sounds. Assembly line for Heinkel jet fighters in an underground factory, April 1945. Germany pushed its industry underground to escape bombing. They were building aircraft of the future in a country that had already lost. The place where Germans were surrounded and captured by the U.S. 7th Army near Heidelberg, April 1945. In the final weeks, entire units surrendered at once. Continuing to fight no longer made sense to anyone. American Marines after 2 days of combat, with the face that 2 days of combat leave behind. No pose, no smile, only the look of someone who has seen too much in too little time and still has not been able to process it. Members of the British Home Guard displaying the weapons they had. At the beginning, fearing invasion, they trained with whatever appeared, even broom handles. They were men too old or too young for the regular army. German mountain troops resting between battles on the Sredny Peninsula near Murmansk, June 1941. That was the northernmost front of the war, in the Arctic, where the cold was an enemy to both sides. 2 American soldiers holding a captured Nazi flag beside a destroyed tank. Tearing that symbol down, piece by piece, was what those men had crossed a continent to do. There was the trophy. Portuguese military observers inspecting a captured Soviet heavy tank near Leningrad, November 1941. Portugal was neutral, but it sent people to look closely. Everyone wanted to know what the war was really like. A captured German pilot. Anyone who fell behind enemy lines became a prisoner in an instant. For an aviator, used to fighting alone up above, being caught on the ground and surrounded was the opposite of everything he knew. An American pilot back among his own, celebrating with his comrades after a mission. The smile and the cheering friends tell the story without needing a caption. For those who flew in combat, every safe return was already a victory. Soviet fighter pilots at a frontline airfield in Karelia, spring 1942. The photo shows young people, and the life expectancy of a fighter pilot in that war was counted in missions, not years. Soviet soldiers crossing a stream. Advancing was not only combat, it was raw logistics, crossing rivers, mud, and forest while carrying everything on their backs. Russian terrain defeated armies before bullets did. A Belgian soldier at a post on the Western Front, 1940. Belgium also tried to defend itself and lasted 18 days. It was run over by the same wave that brought down the Netherlands and France that spring. German soldiers surrendering to the Red Army during the Battle of Moscow, winter 1941. It was the first time Blitzkrieg stalled. The Russian cold and Soviet reinforcements stopped what seemed unstoppable right at the gates of the capital. American soldiers landing on the island of Mauritime, September 1944. Every island-to-island jump in the Pacific brought the Allies closer to Japan. The strategy was to bypass the strongest bases and isolate the enemy. British soldiers being rescued from the coast of Dunkirk, late May 1940. Hundreds of thousands of men trapped on the beach were taken out by an improvised fleet, even civilian fishing boats. They saved an entire army. Siberian soldiers in a railcar on the way to defend Moscow. Stalin brought these troops from the Far East, used to brutal cold, and they turned the game around in the winter of 1941. They arrived at the right time. Königsberg, in East Prussia, April 1945. The Red Army advanced through the ruins of a city Hitler had declared a fortress. When it fell, the war was already inside German territory. Soviet BT-5 tanks destroyed during the Winter War. In 1939, the Soviet Union attacked Finland expecting an easy victory and was beaten badly by the Finns for months. The photo shows the price of arrogance. This German submarine surrendered in May 1945, carrying uranium oxide and jet fighter plans intended for Japan. The 2 Japanese officers aboard chose to kill themselves with pills rather than be captured. The uranium disappeared toward the American atomic project. An Australian Matilda tank with soldiers aboard on Labuan Island, June 1945. The Matilda was slow, but its thick armor could withstand fire that destroyed other tanks. In the Pacific, it still did the job. French Hotchkiss tanks advancing through a destroyed Valenciennes. France had good tanks in 1940, sometimes better than the German ones. It lost anyway because it used them wrong, scattered instead of concentrated. A captured Soviet armored car, now serving the Finns, stopped in front of houses in Petrozavodsk, 1941. Equipment taken from the enemy was reused immediately. In war, nothing useful is thrown away. Wounded soldiers eating at a table, some bandaged, with a doctor in the background. After the chaos of combat, a plate of hot food was almost a luxury. Small moments of humanity amid so much destruction. A German soldier crossing the street of a burning Soviet village beside an anti-tank gun. German tactics in the east left scorched earth wherever they passed. Burned villages became a common landscape. During the Battle of Moscow, someone had the job of carrying hot rations to the front line. In the photo, a German on a BMW motorcycle carries the insulated food container. Even in the greatest offensive in history, war is lunchbox logistics. An American soldier beside a train loaded with destroyed German Messerschmitt fighters, 1945. By the end of the war, the Air Force that once dominated Europe's skies looked like this, scrap piled onto railcars, heading for the junkyard. Captured by the Finns before interrogation, the Red Army soldier in the photo does not know what comes next. The Winter War and the conflict that followed filled Finnish camps with Soviet prisoners. A Japanese-American being detained. After Pearl Harbor, the United States imprisoned more than 100,000 citizens of Japanese ancestry in camps, without trial, only because of their descent. Many had sons fighting in the U.S. Army. The V for victory sign, 2 fingers raised, became a symbol of Allied resistance. Churchill spread it around the world. It was a simple way to say, in any occupied country, that hope had not died. Soviet air defense pilots enjoying a break. Those who protected cities from bombers lived on standby, waiting for the alarm. The break in the photo was a short interval before the sky called them back. A female mechanic checking the engine of a training aircraft at a base in Texas. In the United States, women kept the planes flying while the men were away. Hands in the grease, wrench in hand doing the job. London taxi drivers with camouflaged and armed taxis. When the fear of invasion was real, even cab drivers joined the city's defense. They turned their work cars into war vehicles just in case. A line of women welders, with the factory's welding champion among them. The war opened professions to women that had previously been forbidden to them. Many discovered they did the work as well as men, or better. This 19-year-old woman assembled machine guns in a Toronto factory and became a Canadian propaganda poster in 1941. Ronnie, the Bren Gun Girl, came more than a year before America's Rosie the Riveter. The symbol was born in Canada. A soldier of the Grossdeutschland division playing with a cat inside an armored vehicle near Voronezh, July 1942. In the middle of steel and fire, a little cat found shelter. War had pockets of tenderness like that. Portrait of pilots and mechanics from a Soviet assault wing in Berlin, May 1945. The photo shows those who survived to the end and reached the enemy capital. For many there, it was the first time in years without fear of dying the next day. Bing Crosby, singing for Allied troops at the opening of a canteen in London. Hollywood stars went to the front to entertain the soldiers. A night of music was the piece of home those men needed most. Actress Marlene Dietrich signing the cast on a wounded soldier's leg. German by birth, she turned her back on Hitler and spent the war singing for American troops. Her own native country called her a traitor. A coffee break in the middle of war. No combat, no heroism, just the short pause that kept the mind in place. In those ordinary minutes, the soldier remembered he was still human. A sailor alone with a book in the hold of a ship, surrounded by chain bunks. After months of noise and metal, finding a quiet corner to read was the rarest luxury a man aboard ship could have.